Hello, chess fans. I'm Sam Copeland, National Master on the content team here at Chess.com, and I'm here today with another amazing computer chess game. This game was played in a bullet test tournament between Komodo and the chess engine Scorpio. I'm going to go ahead and claim at the outset of this video that this is the best chess miniature that I have seen this century. In fact, the game doesn't really feel like it's from this century, much less the 1900s. It feels like it's from the 1800s, the era of Paul Morphy and Adolf Anderssen. White sacrifices material at every turn and finishes with a beautiful, beautiful checkmate. The game opens up with e4, e5, and something original here on move 2, bishop c4, the bishop's opening. Now, the Computer Chess Championship games are played with an opening book used to make the games more interesting so the engines don't always play the most reliable openings like the Berlin. They do discover new territory. So I'm not exactly sure when the engines were out of book, but it's usually the first 2 or 3 moves. So this definitely feels like one of those moves. Now Black plays bishop c5, and if they're not following book, knight f6 would probably have been better than bishop c5. The problem with bishop c5 is that Black is copying white, but white is a move ahead, and so white should be better equipped to achieve c3 and d4 and attack and gain time by harassing that bishop. So after bishop c5, we now see knight to f3 attacking the pawn here on e5, and now we see pawn to d6. White goes for the idea I just mentioned, pawn to c3 to step forward with pawn to d4 and to attack that bishop and build a great center with a gain of time. The next move is very unique to me, queen to e7. I generally don't like having a queen on e7, but of course, when the bishop is no longer on f8, it's much more reasonable. However, this move still seems to work out very, very badly for Black, but the only way to take full advantage of this slight error is really to sacrifice material, which Komodo shows very, very quickly that it is willing to do. So d4 is now very, very natural, and I wonder if one of the reasons for queen e7 is maybe a miscalculation from the engine. It seems like queen e7 is kind of designed to allow pawn takes d4, queen takes e4 check, but this is a mistake. Queen e7 has not stopped the break d4 because now after king f1, Black has problems. The bishop is under attack, and if the bishop falls back, there's the nice move bishop takes f7. White is gaining a huge advantage. White did have to move the king, but now Black also has to move the king, and White's gaining more tempos with moves like knight c3 very, very soon. If the king captures the bishop, the problem is knight g5 check with a royal fork, winning the game. So after pawn to d4, what we actually see is the move bishop back to b6 right away, and now knight g5, a common problem. Beginning players know well the difficulties that you can have when trying to defend this f7 pawn. Now, Black could play bishop e6 and accept a weakened pawn structure, but White is definitely better there, so Black tries knight to h6 instead. After knight to h6, White goes ahead and castles, and we get knight to c6, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. It is at this point in the game that I really think Komodo starts to show its stuff. We get the move pawn to a4, going for the move pawn to a5, which will disrupt the coordination of the minor pieces. Now, of course, Black can capture on d4, which is what Scorpio goes ahead and does, and we do get a5. Tactically, the only option here is to capture with the bishop. If you capture with the knight, White has the nice tactic, rook takes a5, bishop takes a5, and queen a4, check, and a fork. White is gaining material and has a huge advantage in this position. Notice that Black also can't pull the bishop to c5 because the move pawn b4 would trap the bishop on c5. So after a5, we do get bishop takes a5, and White takes back on d4 and gains a beautiful center. In this position, though, Black pulls back to b6, and there's a big question. What are you doing about the pawn on d4? A natural developing move like bishop e3 actually shows some of the problems. There is the move bishop takes d4, and Black is undermining the defense of this knight. In fact, in this position, Scorpio is doing really, really well. So instead, after bishop to b6, we see another sacrifice, knight c3. In this game, in general, Komodo shows a total disdain for its pawns. It's always willing to give up pawns if it can get piece activity. So after knight to c3, we see bishop takes d4, knight to d5. This is a beautiful, beautiful knight. It's definitely going to have a huge role to play in this game. The queen falls back to d8, and I love the next move as well, rook to a3, an early rook lift. The rook is coming over to the king side, and it's going to be very, very potent. Now, I think that the next move is probably a mistake from Scorpio. I think it is losing. Possibly better is the move bishop to g4, disrupting white's coordination and encouraging the queen to move. Now, white has a ton of activity and probably an advantage after the move queen d2, but is white winning as in the game? I don't think so yet. Deep analysis by chess engines does not indicate a clear win, and at least after the move played in the game, which is castling, I can no longer find a defense. So after rook to a3, we do get castles, and now rook to g3, creating a ton of latent threats. Now, one thing to appreciate in this position is just how darn difficult it is to move anything for black. The pieces don't look to be so badly placed, but they don't really have targets or anything productive to do in the position. As a human, the natural thing to do seems to be to move this bishop out. We want to develop it, but the developments lose tactically. For example, after bishop e6, white can take on e6, and after pawn takes e6, there is bishop takes h6. This is a huge idea in the position, the idea to move the knight on g5 and then take the knight on h6. Now, after capturing on h6, you may well notice that there is a knight loose on d5, but after pawn takes, bishop takes d5 check, white is winning. For example, after king h8, we cannot take on g7 right away and give mate because the square is defended, but we can play queen takes d4, making the first of many queen sacrifices in this game. After queen takes d4, if the knight captures, it is mate, but ultimately it is mate in 2 after anything that black tries. So after bishop takes d5 check, more sensible is rook to f7 here, but there are many wins. One win is bishop takes, king takes, and then queen to b3 check, king back, and then rook f3 check. After bishop f6, queen e6 is really, really pretty. In this position, the king can't move at all. Really, there's no productive move, and the idea of rook takes f6 basically wins against anything that black tries. Another bishop development to mention is the idea of bishop d7, when white can't move the knight by capturing anything, but you don't necessarily need to capture when you move the knight to make big threats. In this position, knight to f3 threatens knight takes d4, and bishop takes h6, winning the game. So what we actually get is the move king to h8, a very sad move to have to play when you're under attack. You're desperate to get your pieces into the game so that they can contribute, and when you have to play moves like king h8 instead, you feel like you're really a sitting duck and your opponent is just continuing to take cheap shots at your chin. So after the move king h8, we get queen h5. The queen is beautiful over on the h5 square. The bishop now does develop to e6, and in this position, white has a crushing and beautiful move. Knight takes h7. Boom! A strong and decisive knight sacrifice. Now, in this position, because of the many threats, including bishop takes h6, there is really no alternative to accepting the knight sacrifice. King takes h7. Now, in this position, the idea is either to play bishop d3 or e5, and both moves are part of a decisive attack. Obviously, the bishop is participating in the attack, but also the e5 break will close off this bishop's ability to defend g7. That's important because if the bishop is not defending g7, we can often sacrifice our rook and force mate or the win of material. So it's hard to decide between the moves e5 and bishop d3, but deeper calculation that you can check in the notes shows that Komodo's bishop d3 is the better move. After bishop d3 in this position, one idea might be knight to e5 to stop the e5 break and to attack this bishop down here, but in this position we've blocked the bishop on d4, so it's time to sacrifice the rook. Rook takes g7, king takes, and queen takes h6. Now, in this position after king g8, knight to f6 check, there's no way to get out of check other than giving up the queen, and after queen takes f6, you can't capture on d3 because your own bishop hangs, so white is up too much material, and white wins the game fairly easily. In the game, we see a better defensive try. It is the move rook to h8. Now, in this position, I think most humans would want to go for the move e5 check, but this move is a big mistake. There is king g8, bishop takes h6, and then bishop takes e5. In this position, you did win the knight on h6, but you were already down a knight, so you're still down material. And you're in trouble on h6, you're in trouble on d5, and you are in trouble on g3. In fact, there is a draw here, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because the idea is going to come up again in the game, but with a little twist that makes it a winning idea. So what's actually played after rook to h8 is the move bishop to g5, awkwardly attacking the black queen. So that queen moves over to c8. Now, one alternative idea instead of queen c8 is the move g6. This is a clever idea because if you capture the knight, then after king g8, your own queen is trapped, and although you can trade queens by capturing black's queen, it's not so easy to win the game. But after g6, we can play e5, pinning this pawn so it can't capture, and now black has too many problems on h6 and on d8. White's attack should be decisive here. So after bishop g5, we did get that move queen c8, and now e5 check, king g8, bishop takes h6, bishop takes e5, and this is very similar to the position we just looked at where I said that white could not win the game. However, there's a difference. Black's queen has had to move, and so now white has a forced winning continuation. If you want to play like Komodo, pause your video and find the only decisive way. The winning move here is queen takes e5. Boom! A tremendous and immediately decisive move. Again, this feels straight out of the 1800s, straight out of Paul Morphy's and Adolf Anderson's handbook. Now, there's no alternative to accepting the queen sacrifice because white still has a huge attack in this position. So pawn takes e5, rook takes g7 check, and king over to f8. But still, in this position, what does white have as a follow-up? It's another sacrifice. Rook to g8 and double check. Because it's double check from both the bishop and the rook here, it's not possible to capture the rook with the rook. Instead, only the king can capture. And in this position, there is knight to f6 and checkmate. It's a good thing the queen is no longer on the d8 square. This is a beautiful checkmate. I hope you've enjoyed this whole game, but certainly the finish with queen takes e5, punch number 1, and then rook takes g7 and rook to g8, punch number 2, and finally knight to f6. The knockout blow is just a dazzling idea, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. I hope you also found it to be the best chess miniature that has existed in this century. If you want to check out more really beautiful, often more sophisticated computer chess games, then definitely click on the playlist that is popping up on your screen.